welcome to another CRaFTi Experiments video, and this is one of the Gelli Experiments kind of videos where I'm actually going to be looking at opaque versus translucent or transparent kind of paints. We're going to go with primary colours, and I'm also going to show you a transparent set of paints with Arteza and a transparent set of paints with Pebeo, plus a opaque set of paints with Arteza and an opaque set of paints with Pebeo. So we're kind of sort of comparing Arteza and Pebeo, but also we're mostly just looking at transparent versus opaque versions of acrylic paints. So I'm hoping that this kind of video is going to be helpful for me, because I just want to get that knowledge in my brain, but also I think it's going to be helpful for some of you who might have struggled with your jelly printing in the past. It might be like some of the results that you got that you weren't happy with, it might be down to the opacity of the paints that you're using. Maybe you've been creating a one layer pull, building all of your layers onto the plate, letting them dry in between, and you pull it off and you think, oh, that wasn't the colour that I put on to begin with, because maybe it was a transparent colour and all of the colours behind it have affected the look of that first colour. Or perhaps, again, you've done like multiple building ups, but maybe the first layer that you've put on the plate, maybe you didn't take off much of the paint from that, and maybe then when you pull the entire print off of it, it's mostly that first colour and all of the subsequent layers are just lost behind it. And that could be because you've used an opaque paint, whereas if it had been transparent or translucent, you would have been able to see those other layers behind it. So hopefully this will kind of help you sort of think about the differences between the sort of opacity of your paints. So I've selected primary colours from the two different brands that I'm playing with, and I've got so for my opaque colours for Pebeo, so with Pebeo's line, opaque is represented by the black square, and I've gone for primary yellow, cadmium red hue and primary cyan as my three colours for the opaque Pebeos. Then for Arteza show opaque as a white square, and for theirs the whole square is filled in because they show the other paints differently. So for opaque for Arteza, it's the white square, and I have gone with yellow ochre, cobalt blue and carmine red. Then for the transparent versions of the colours, again, I've gone with primary colours because I'm hoping, especially with transparent, I'm hoping I can kind of show you one of the benefits of transparent, which is if you're layering like two layers on top of each other, one's red, one's yellow, where they intersect, you should get a secondary colour forming. It may not be a perfect secondary colour, but it should be some kind of orangey tone formed between those two, or a greeny tone between these two. So for the transparent or translucent versions of the colours, I've gone with dark ultramarine, light azo yellow and transparent vermilion. So for the Pebeo transparent, it is the white square. And then for the transparent or semi-transparent version of Arteza, not many of their colours are completely transparent. This ultramarine blue one is, because it's got an empty square, but the other two that I found for my other two primaries are scarlet red and mid yellow. They're only semi-transparent, but that is more transparent than their opaque paint, so hopefully it will still work in a similar manner. Also, you might notice here, at some point during some of these experimental videos, possibly this one, possibly another one, you might notice me trying to decant my Arteza paints into squeezy silicone tubes that I bought, because some of them, I'm guessing it's because I didn't clean the neck of the tube off the last time I used them, but some of them, they're getting like really stuck, and when I twist them, that top part of the lid pops up a little bit, and I don't want the whole tube drying out. This one is still pliable in there, so I don't think this one has dried out, but I might be rescuing some of my paints along this journey of these experiment videos as well, so you might see that later down the line, and that might be useful to you as well. So that'll be why that I will include it in whatever video it ends up occurring in. So let's start with opaque paints, because I feel like that is what a beginner would kind of go towards, because then you're like, if I've built a layer on my plate and I print it onto something, it's going to show up because it's going to be opaque. So whatever's underneath it, it will sit on top of it and show up. So I think this would be a good place for us to start. And I do want to go through different types of building up prints, because you can build up a print by making a single layer on your plate and picking it up with a piece of paper, then making another single layer, picking it up with the same piece of paper, another single layer and picking it up with the same piece of paper. However, you can also do prints where you build one layer, you let it dry, you build another layer on top of it, you let it dry, you build another layer on top of it, you let it dry, and then you pull it off with another paint. And I'm going to do that, but I'm going to show you it with half pulling it off with white and half pulling it off with a dark colour like Payne's Grey, because that's really going to indicate to you the usefulness of transparency versus opaqueness, I think, as well, or the maybe the downside as well, perhaps. Just different things for you to think about when you're picking your different colours and stuff as well. Obviously, you can just jelly print serendipitously and pick whatever paint that you lay your hand onto, and then you just get the results that you get, and that's totally fine too. But if you ever struggled, or you want to think about it a little bit more and you really want a yellow pattern to be on top of a blue background or something, then this just might help you, you know, sort of think about which different paints. So there's paints even. So there's nothing, like, there's no right or wrong way of doing it. This isn't like the only way that you should do it, by thinking about opaque and transparent. You can mix the two as well. There's no rules really. I just thought this would be an interesting video, and I quite like to look into it a little bit further as well. So, for this first print, let's go with the lightest colour first, and we're going to do individual layers and layer them all up. No, that's not going to work, is it? No, we want to do the darkest colour first. Sorry, I'm going to get confused as well. We want to do the darkest colour first and layer the colours up on top of each other. So we end with the lightest colour, and then with it being opaque, it should still appear over the top. So let's first of all go with our blue. So I'm going to go with the opaque Pebeo, which I'm going to use primary cyan, and I'm going to do a solid colour of this. So I'm going to do a nice solid layer of our primary cyan. Okay, and we can pull this up. In my one of my previous videos, you will have seen me talk about a barren, and I'm trying this cake icing tool out to sort of be a kind of barren. So we've got our first nice opaque layer there. That pulled off really nicely as well. The Pebeo paints are very good on the jelly plate. We've got a bit of texture in there, but that kind of adds to our print. And then we're going to keep going with the Pebeo. We're going to do all the same brand of colours just to keep it more consistent. But the next layer, we're going to go with the red version of our paint, which is going to be the cadmium red hue, is the one that I've picked out. So we're going to add a layer of this. And this is going to kind of introduce stencils into our process as well. You don't have to use stencils, but it's a quite nice way of adding pattern. And if you're a card maker, you probably have a lot of stencils in your stash. But if you don't want to get your stencils mucky with paint, then later down the line in my experiments videos with the jelly plate, there will be more videos looking into what you can do if you don't want to get your stencils mucky. But this stencil here is one from Dina Wakley, which I absolutely adore. It's quite thick with paint on the other side. And this one, I think it was called Squovels or something. But it's a really gorgeous sort of organic, squarey, circly kind of shape. And for this one, because we're doing it on, we're using a stencil, I'm pressing through those openings because we really want that paint to pick up onto our blue background, and hopefully, because these are opaque paints, we should be able to see red on top of blue. And there we go, we've got red on top of blue. It is going a tiny bit purple, so even though some of these paints say that they're opaque, they might still be a slight bit of transparency in them, but it's showing up. So that's the most important thing, I think. And now we're going to really put it to the test and go with the yellow, and we're going to do stripes over the top of this. So first of all though, we've got to deal with the paint that's left on here. So I'm just going to take my roll-off sheet that I've been cleaning my brayer onto and see if I can pick this up. If not, it might just be a little bit of extra texture in the next layer. Some of it came off and there's just a tiny bit left on there, but that will be fine for our next layer. So the final layer we're going to do on this, just to sort of show the opacity, is the yellow, which is the primary yellow in the Pebeo, which should be a nice opaque yellow. So we're going to brayer this out. And we might end up seeing a little bit of the red on top of the yellow, just because there's a little bit of the red pattern still on our gel plate. So now I'm going to use a stripy stencil, which is one that I got a while back from CRaFTi actually. And then we're going to just put our print back on top and try and press down the stripes of this stencil to pick up that stripy pattern. Okay, I'm not sure if I've got all of that, but oh, that's pretty good actually. That really is showing the opacity of that. That's brilliant, that is. So that's really nice and opaque. So let's repeat this process with the Artesas just to see the difference in the brands and see if there is a difference. So this one is our Pebeo Opaque, just so that we can contrast and compare and see you know, what the different brands are like. So you can also take a print with this if you want to. I've got some of these random ones left from the previous video. So let's put the yellow stripes on top of this background, just so we're not wasting them. So there we've got beautiful yellow stripes on that gorgeous coral background, and some of that red, you can still see those sort of squovely shapes on there as well, which is quite nice. So I'll leave that one there, and then there's still a bit of paint on our plate. So there's multiple ways to clean this off. You can use packing tape, but I'm not going to do that because Pumpkin's sitting on the windowsill in front of me and she'll think I'm packaging up a parcel. So I'm not going to do the packaging tape in this video, but I will do it in another one. But the way I'm going to do it to show you is spraying it with water and wiping it off with an old flannel. And I actually bought this, well, this isn't an old flannel, I bought it for this reason, but this was from Home Bargains and it was like 59p or something. So really inexpensive way of cleaning your plate over and over, because if you're using baby wipes and paper towels, then you're going to get through quite a lot of them. So it's quite nice to have something that you can keep reusing, and you can just wash it if it gets really caked up with paint, but that will clean it off really nicely, and it shouldn't leave any fibres on your plate. Whereas if you're using baby wipes and kitchen roll, you tend to get those little fibres left all over the plate, which is a little bit annoying sometimes. So we've got a nice clean plate now. So we're going to repeat the exact same process. I'll speed this up so you don't have to listen to me rabbit on, but I'm going to repeat the same process, going with the Artesa colours, cobalt blue, carmine red, and then yellow ochre, and these are the opaque colours that I've picked out, and we should hopefully get similar results to what we just got with the Pebeo paints. so here we've got our two comparisons. You can kind of see, because I was trying to pick opaque colours from each of the different ranges of paints, the colours are slightly different. Like yellow ochre is quite an orange sort of yellow, whereas the primary yellow is a very lemony sort of yellow, and the slight differences in the blues, and the red's very similar actually. But you can see with opaque paints you get the distinct layers. So you've got a blue background with red squarey circly shapes on with yellow stripes on top. So that's basically when you're working with opaque paints, this is the kind of result that you're going to get. And the red, it's gone a little bit purple on both of them, but it's still a red tone, you know, you can still sort of identify it as a red tone. So now we're going to repeat this exact same process for both sets of transparent paints, and we're going to see if the results are different. I mean, they should be different, but let's just compare and see what the results are. And also here, where we've got yellow that goes straight over the top of red and blue and still appears very yellow, when we do the transparent versions we should see more of a difference between the colours. So like the yellow should show more orangey on top of the red and then more greeny when it goes across the blue. So hopefully those differences will be apparent, but that is kind of what we're going to be looking for. So this time I will do the Arteza ones with you, and then I will speed up the Pebeo ones just to show you, you know, real time of the different brands, just in case there's any differences between them. But I think the Arteza ones were pretty much very similar to the Pebeo ones. They're very similar in, you know, viscosity and everything. So we're going to go with the darkest again. So we're going to go ultramarine blue first this time, which is our transparent Arteza paint. And we're going to build our solid background colour. I think you can already tell the transparency actually, because you can see my grid mat through there. I don't think we could see it with the previous blue layer. I mean, I wasn't particularly looking, but I don't think we could see it. So let's go and place this on top. Actually, if we just look at these, the blue layer, you can hardly see the grid through from the graph paper. So they were, you know, a pretty opaque kind of blue to begin with. So we can keep forgetting to use that makeshift Baron, but probably use it again down the line. Okay, so this is our Arteza Ultramarine. Is it dark ultramarine? No, just ultramarine. It's the other one that's dark ultramarine. Okay, so ultramarine blue. Then we're going to go, that pulled off really nicely actually, it got all of it off the plate. We're going to go scarlet red, which is apparently a semi-transparent colour, and I cannot get the lid off. I think this is going to be one of the ones I'm going to have to decant. The other red ones, the lid is also coming off, so I might be decanting these into one of the new bottles that I bought. Yes, it has gone a little bit thick actually. Will the further down stuff be thinner? Possibly. I might have to discard that top thick bit there. I know it seems a waste, but I think I'm going to have to do that because it's been open to the air a little bit from that hole in the top of it. So you can see it's very thick. I don't know how well this is going to work for this experiment, but oh no, that's spreading out nicely now. Okay, that's okay. Okay, so we're going to get our squarey ovally sort of one, put it on top, and then pick up the pattern. Sorry if you can hear my chair squeaking, I really need to put some WD-40 on it. Okay, so there we have our transparent red. I do think that does look different. Maybe not as much as I was hoping it would sort of turn purple, but I do think it does look different being a transparent paint rather than an opaque paint. And then we've got a little bit of this left over. I've been looking through all of my sheets from the previous video just to pick up some of the excess, just to add some, you know, interest to some of those. So I think that's going to be clean enough. And then we're going to go with our transparent yellow for the Arteza, which is mid yellow. Much better consistency than that red. I do think I'm going to have to rescue that red colour and put it in another tube before I lose it. Okay, so this is beautiful yellow. And we're going to go with the stripes again, just to keep everything consistent. Not sure what I'm going to do with 3 primary coloured or 4 primary coloured black backgrounds, but okay. So there we have our supposedly transparent paint. You can actually see it a little bit. It's not as evident as I thought it was going to be, but here you can see that there's a slight like orange in that sort of curve of where the circle would start. It is slightly more orange, and I guess slightly more greeny over the top of the blue. So it's not as like noticeable as I thought it was going to be. I think you can tell that these the one on the right is not quite so opaque as the one on the left. So interesting. I did think it was going to be more noticeable than that. So let's try the Pebeo ones, and I'll speed that up and we'll come back to it at the end. But I'll just play with this paint and speed all of this up. So we'll see what happens with the Pebeo ones. Okay, so this is the Pebeo one that I just did sped up. It's not very well aligned, and I also dropped the paper to begin with, so it's got a little bit of mess on the side. Plus also the solid ultramarine, just really wanted to pick up anything that was on the plate already. That was already the second one that I did the first time I pulled it off. It just decided to find every single tiny little bit of yellow that was left on the plate and pull it off as well. So it's a little bit murkier, this one, but I still don't think the transparency, I mean, no, it does. When you compare it to the opaque one, it does definitely show the difference. Look at that. So you can see opaque paints give colour on top of colour on top of colour, and basically the true colour, whereas when you're going with transparent paints, you're getting a more subtle effect. It's not like bright yellow, it's a subtle version of yellow that's sort of melding into the reddy tones and the bluey tones, giving orangey and greeny kind of tones as well. So it does, I do think it was worth doing this, and I do think it does show you the difference between them. I mean, it probably would have helped if I'd had exactly the same colour red, because, I mean, this red was already a bit murky to begin with, and this red is very bright and vibrant, but they almost look the same colour on the backgrounds. But this is really dulled down by the blue, but that's not actually much different to what it is off the blue to on the blue. So I do think that it is worth doing this kind of experiment with opaque versus transparent paints. It's maybe not quite as obvious of a difference as I wanted to show you, but hopefully the next part of this experiment will kind of show you the more obvious difference between transparent versus opaque. And I think I am going to go with the Pebios to show it, because I think they gave the biggest difference. You can see the difference with the Arteza as well, but I think they look much more similar than these two do, which probably could be because these said they were opaque, but only the blue of this said it was translucent. The others said semi-translucent or transparent. So there's not quite so much difference. I do definitely think there's more of a difference between those two, although I got the colours more spot on with these two, but I do think the difference is more evident with these two. So for the next part of this experiment, I'm going to bring in a second plate, because we're going to do both of them at the same time, because we're going to require drying time between things. So I'm just going to take the Arteza paints out of the way, because I am going to go with the Pebeo paints, and I do need to make sure that I keep opaque with opaque and translucent with translucent. So translucent is white squares, opaque is black squares, so that I don't forget. And I might even put these on opposite sides of me to remind me as well that the translucent is that side, opaque's that side. So I'm going to bring back in the plate that I've just been using. It's very yellow looking. One of the, I think it was the yellow pigment from the transparent Arteza was very stubborn, very stubbornly pigmented, because it kept pulling off on that dark blue as well. So it's a little bit yellow looking on here, but it should be fine. And it's not going to quite be apples to apples because I don't have another 6x6 square. So I'm going to go with a 4x4 square, and we'll sort of look at the differences between them. So let's use my Dina Wakley block for this one. I don't think I've used this plate before. I thought I had, but maybe I have never used the square one before, the little square. Or if I did, I cleaned it very well when I put it back, so. Okay, so we'll roll that on to make sure there's no air bubbles underneath here. There's a few little ones, but nothing that's going to impact our print too much. So what we're going to do is, I think I'm going to do transparent on this side actually, which is totally going to throw me off. Well, actually I could just swap the jelly plates. I'm going to swap the jelly plates instead, because then I know which ones are on which side of me, because I think I want to do the opaque on the smaller plate, because the difference is not going to be as dramatic. I think it's going to be better to see the transparent one on the bigger plate, because it should be more sort of noticeable. So just double checking I put the back on the right side. Yes. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do a layered print using similar stencils, I think, because we might as well. But the difference is going to be we're layering up the layers onto the plate. So we're not doing one layer pulling it onto the print, one layer pulling it onto the print like we just did. We're going to be building everything onto this plate. So we're going to reverse our colour order. We want to start with the lightest colour, and then when I eventually pull it off the plate, I'm going to do half of it with white paint and half of it with Payne's Grey, which is a nice dark grey kind of colour, to show you the difference between with the transparent in particular. We'll see if it makes a difference with the opaque as well, but with the transparent in particular, to see if it makes a difference, or hopefully show you the difference of, because they are that translucentness, if you pull it off with a darker colour, you're going to therefore like darken up the translucent layers in front of it, but if you pull it with a lighter colour, you should keep the colours a bit more. Hopefully it'll work and it'll all make sense, but that's the kind of gist of what I'm going to try and do. So there's going to be quite a little bit of drying involved in this, so I might not do all of it at real time. I might speed up some of it, and with the stencils as well, I don't know if I want to do the colours in the same order. I think I will, and I'll add that tiny dotty stencil as the blue in the background, I think. So we're going to go yellow first. So to get the yellow stripes onto there, we're actually going to put the stencil onto the plate. I'm going to go transparent first, and then I'm going to take the transparent paint and I'm going to put it on top of my stencil, which seems weird, but I'm going to put it on top of my stencil so that I can brayer it out, and it's hopefully just going to go into all of the details of the stencil. This might not be like 100% perfect, but it should just put that yellow in stripes onto our plate. There we go. We've got our beautiful, very translucent yellow stripes. Actually, it'd be quite nice to sort of see it dark on light just there before I pull it, actually. That might be quite interesting. Okay, then I'm going to put the stencil, again, this is paint side up. I try to always use my stencils on the same side. You know, I always put the same side down on to get all of the paint on it. I just find it's a little bit better that way to keep one side of the stencil clean. So this time we're going with the Opaque Pebeo. Don't need quite so much paint. We're putting it again on top of the stencil, which is on the jelly plate, and we're going to brayer it through the openings. Ooh. This has actually got so many layers of paint on it, some of it's actually pulling off as I'm brayering over it. So this stencil may need a wash soon, but we've got some kind of stripe on there, and actually you can already see the difference of the transparency of, you know, because before we were looking at all of the same type of paint at the same time, so it was very difficult to compare, but now we can see the comparisons, and actually this, even though this is on white, it still looks less, you know, vibrant than the opaque onto the black. So very interesting. I do like doing these kind of experiments. I think they really are you know, worth your time to sort of experiment and see what sort of happens with these different things. So I'm just brayering this stencil off onto one of my roll-off sheets, and you can even pull prints off of your painty stencil that way as well. I think that one's pretty much done, actually. It's pretty, that one. Okay, that is definitely going to need a good wash. But first of all, we've got to wait for this to dry. So I'll be back in a couple of minutes when this is dried. Okay, I think they're practically dry now. They might still be a tiny bit wet, but I don't think it'll matter too much. So now we're going to take the Dina Wakley stencil, which I still can't remember the name, I'm sure it's called Squoval, something like that. We can place that on, again, paint side up, just because I do like to keep the stencils just painty on one side. And we're going to go transparent vermilion as our colour, and we can just spray this through the openings of the stencil. Okay, there we go, brilliant. Again, you can kind of see that black versus white transparency if I put it on that bit of the Tim Holtz matte. Then we're going with the opaque one, and we're using the cadmium red hue. Might be a bit too much paint. The yellow was taking a long time to dry on this one. Okay, there's our opaque one. You can really see the differences now, actually, when you're doing them side by side. I think I'm going to roll off that red onto there, and then I've got a roll off sheet here. Can I push everything along so you can actually see what I'm doing? If you flip this over paint side down and then brayer it, you're pushing that stencil right into contact with your paper, and you should be able to get some of the gorgeous paint off of there. I quite like that roll-off sheet now. I think that one's done too. And I think that stencil's probably due for a wash soon as well. So now we've got to wait for these two layers to dry. So I'm going to wait for them to dry, and then I'll be back, and we're going to, where did I put it here? We're going to just use some tiny blue polka dots in the background. And to apply this, I'm going to use one of the tonic little daubers. So I'll see you when these are dry, and we'll experiment with either this dauber or a sponge on a ink blending tool. Okay, those are both dry now, so let's take this very fine spotty stencil and go with the dark ultramarine blue, which is the transparent Pebeo. I did say I was going to speed some of this up, but I feel like it's actually probably quite interesting for you if you've never tried a layered gel print before. It might be helpful for a different way of doing it, perhaps. Don't know if that is actually... Nope, that's not very good to go through there. So let's use a ink blending tool. I do tend to keep the sponges dirty on these as well, and then I'll just use them for all sorts of different things. Will this go through? Kind of. I don't want to put too much paint on there because it will squidge underneath, but that's better, I think, actually. Okay. This might take a little while. Okay, I think we need more paint than this. So I'm not doing the brayer method for this one because it's such small openings, even a foam tool is struggling to put the paint through those openings. So I think if I bray it over the top, it would struggle even more, and I'd basically just be painting the stencil rather than actually getting any paint onto the jelly plate. We can kind of lift it up and check. Oh, it is coming through. It's probably not going to be as perfect little dots as you can see on this, but hopefully it will just give us that extra colour for trying to improve whatever point we're kind of playing with for this. Okay, so I think that's going to be the best we're going to get. There we go. So that is our transparent blue dots on there. And then I don't think it really matters if we're mixing, because we've gone from transparent to opaque. It would be different if we went from opaque to transparent, because we might be hindering the transparency of that. But I don't think we're really going to mess around with the opacity of the opaque paint just by having a little bit of the translucent on our sponge. Well, that's going through better on this one. That's funny. Maybe it's because that is transparent and it kind of was looking to me like it wasn't going through, because it is such a transparent colour. It was difficult for me to tell that it had gone through the openings. So maybe this was alright then. Let's just try it again with the... No, that's not actually... So it is mini foam tool is going to be the best way for doing this. Or I guess a piece of cut and dry foam, if you still prefer using cut and dry foam, or if that seems like less wasteful for you, if you don't want to waste a circular sponge. You know, you could just use a tiny little bit of cut and dry foam, or you can wash these out as well. This, I mean, these paints will dry really hard. If you're used to using, oh sorry, that was the wrong colour then. If you're used to using Diane Reevely's Dilutions paints, I've never actually tried them, but she says that her sponges, even though she leaves paint in them, that they're still malleable, so you might be able to get away with that if you're using that kind of paint. But if you're using these ones, they will dry rock hard in those. So now we've got to leave those to dry, and we've got our little opaque blue dots on there. I'm just seeing if there's anything that I've got here that might benefit from... I mean, this is going to give a subtle kind of effect. This was from the previous video. Oh no, it wasn't. It was from... No, it was from this video. God, I've been filming this for so long, it feels like it was the previous video. No, it was from this one. And I'm just going to press that down and then brayer that, just to try and get rid of as much of the paint as I can off of this stencil. Oh, that does look quite nice actually. Very nice and subtle. Just gives a little spotty effect to that. Okay, so I'll let this dry and then I'll be back in a minute to pull it off, or show you how we're going to pull it off with white and Payne's grey to try and show the differences. Okay, we're getting towards the end now. So the next stage, once we've got our 3 layers all built up and dried onto here, we want to add a final layer of colour to pull the whole design off of the jelly plate. Usually you would just use a single colour to pull it off, and the benefit I was telling you about in the introduction video of putting them on a clear acrylic block is that you can see through it. You can turn it over and see through it, and you can be like, oh, what about a beige colour? If I pulled it off with a beige colour, you could put it on something green and go, what if I pulled it off with a green colour? You know, you can play around with it, oops, and decide what colour you might want to pull your print with. It's a little bit harder with one with grids on it, but you can kind of, it gives you more of a visual of, you can sort of see what kind of design you're going to get and what colour you might want to put it off with. But the reason why I want to do this is I want to do it with 2 colours, because I don't think it's going to affect this one, but I know it's going to affect this one. The side that has the Payne's grey, which is a nice dark colour on it, is going to look more murky. We might even not be able to see some of the colours, but the side that's got the white on it is going to be the gorgeous colours, as you can already see from it being on the Tim Holtz mat, on the black and the white. So I wanted to do this because I feel like this could be, you know, you could spend hours doing something like this, building up all these different layers, and then if you pull it off with the wrong colour, you might get totally rubbish results that you really didn't want. So I think this is going to be a nice kind of demo to visually show you kind of like cases where you might want to think about opacity within your paints, because I don't think it's going to matter too much with the opaque paint, but with the transparent paints it's really going to matter. So that's why I want to do it with both colours. So first of all, we want to put a blob of white paint on this side, and a blob of my Payne's grey paint, which I just bought this one from the range. I have never tried this brand of acrylic paint before. It's just their Art Studio premium brand, but it was only £1.99. And I know that Payne's grey is going to be a useful colour for some of the other experiments that I want to do later on, and I know that I only have a tiny Pebeo one and a tiny Arteza one of it. So I wanted to get another Payne's grey, and I thought, well, now I have lots of Payne's grey, why not use it for this as well, rather than just using black. Makes a little bit of a difference using Payne's grey. Also, I've put way too much white paint on here, so I'm brayering it off, because you don't want a thick layer. You can put a thick layer on if you want, but you don't really want a thick layer because you've got to wait for this layer to dry before you can pull the whole print off of your plate. So if you have put a really thick layer on there, you're going to be waiting quite a while for the paint to kind of dry and grab the previous layers for you to be able to pull the pattern off. And I have a bad feeling that because I braid over that, no, I think it's going to be alright, because I put a bit of white on that side as well, it might not be quite so evident, or it might help us with the seeing how evident it is. So now we've put that background layer on, we need to put our piece of paper over the top, make sure it's nicely pressed down, and this is where you can get a baron like this, or a fake version of a baron, and press all over it to make sure there's nice firm contact. Now you want to leave that to dry, and you can kind of judge the dryness of it. It feels cool at the moment, it feels colder than just the paper would feel, but I reckon like maybe 5 or 10 minutes and it should be ready to pull off for this. But if you've done a really complicated one that you really want to come off really nicely, you can definitely leave it overnight. It doesn't really matter. You can leave it as long as you want to, really. And if you don't leave it long enough, all that's going to happen is you're just not going to get everything off of the plate. You're just going to leave something behind. But there's nothing wrong with that. That might be the result that you want to get, and then you've got something left on your plate to build on top of again. So it's kind of up to you, you know, sort of like how long you want to leave it. But I'm going to leave these about 5 to 10 minutes, I think, and I will tell you when I come to pull them off exactly how long I did leave them for. I think I've put too much paint on again. That's a really big spout on that paint. Let me just move these. I think I'm going to need to move that around for rolling off onto. And we're going to go white on this side. And then roll the white off and get the Payne's grey on this side. So I don't think it's going to make much of a difference on this one. But we shall see, it might prove me wrong. Okay, so that is that, and then we want another piece of my graph paper, and then we can pull this one off as well. So we'll leave it on even to dry. Okay, we could also press with this as well. Okay, so they are well pressed onto the plate. You can go extra pressure around those edges just to really make sure all of it's going to get pulled up when we pull the paper off in 5 to 10 minutes time. So I'll see you in a couple of seconds for you, but it'll be 5 or 10 minutes for me. Okay, it's been 10 minutes, so let's see if we can pull this print off of the jelly plate. I think it's going to come off. Okay, and that definitely proves the point that I wanted to show about the difference the colour that you pull a multi-layered print off can make to your print. So here, because we use transparent paints, putting a dark colour behind it, we're practically losing everything. I mean, you can barely even see the yellow, even though the red is behind the yellow. You can barely even see it at all. Here, where the two colours are mixing, it's not too bad, but where it's just white, you're pulling off the entire pattern, and we put the blue dots on after the red. So the translucency of the red is showing the blue dots through as well, which is really nice to see. So it wouldn't particularly matter what order you put those three colours in, I don't think, because where the stripes are over the top of the red, or even the stripes were down first and the red was over the top, it's gone orange. So yeah, definitely a cool technique, layering up transparent colours, and it really does make a difference which colour you pull it with, which is nice to see. But let's see, does it make a difference which colour you pull it with if you've used opaque coloured paints? So there we go. So, I mean, it does make a difference, but it actually makes them stand out a bit more on this side, I feel. Especially the blue dots. The blue dots are actually maybe more visible on top of the dark Payne's grey than they are on top of the white, which is really interesting. I quite like that, actually. It gives like a nice bit of grunge on this side going to light. That's actually quite a nice piece. You could cut that into a square and put it on a card. There we go. So it does make a difference which colour you pull a multi-layered print with, even if you're using opaque paints. You're not losing the pattern, but it is giving it a different effect. This is much more light and bright, whereas this is much more grungy looking, having that Payne's grey behind it, because even though that yellow is opaque, it is showing up a little bit more murky, greeny kind of colours with the Payne's grey, because the Payne's grey is kind of like a bluey grey sort of colour, so it is showing up a little bit more greeny. So it's really interesting to play around with these kind of techniques with opaque and transparent paints. So those are those two, and then don't forget we also were looking at the transparent and opaqueness of paints when you're doing single layers and building them up on top of each other as well. And you can see these are all the Pebeo paints, and the totally different effects that you can get layering the same stencils with the same colours. Look at the different effects that you can create. This is both opaque, but look at the difference between them. Those are both the translucent, but again, look at the difference between them. Really interesting, isn't it? So really have a play with all of the different paints that you own, and some of them are the reason why, I probably should have said this at the beginning, but the reason why I picked Pebeo paints and Arteza paints to look at is because they tell you the opacity and the translucency or the semi-transparency, or however you say it. They show you that on the actual container, even like the big ones of white. This one just says opaque on it, and the big Arteza white one has the solid square on there as well. But a lot of paints don't tell you, like this Payne's Grey one doesn't tell you at all if it's opaque or transparent, and like the Dina Wakeley's don't tell you, although I do think because they're heavy bodied they do tend to be a little bit more opaque, but they don't actually tell you on the bottle. And the fluid acrylics, oh, they do tell you. Oh, I didn't realise that. The fluid acrylics, the Meaden ones that we were playing with in the previous video, they do tell you. And oh, it looks as though there's a mixture of opaque, so all of the pastel ones are opaque, and then there is 3 semi-transparent ones, and then also the black and white are opaque as well. So that's really interesting. They do tell you on those ones. I hadn't actually even looked at that, so we could have done this whole experiment with the Meaden fluid acrylics as well. But so do have a look at your paints and see if they actually tell you on the packaging if they're transparent or opaque, or do some experiments yourself. Paint some of them thinly onto black card and white card, or onto white card that you've drawn a black line onto, and see if you see how much you can see it through, or do a thin layer onto graph paper or something so that you can actually see the opacity or the transparentness of the different paints as well. So I hope this video was interesting to you. I've certainly found it interesting, especially this result, that pulling the colour that you pull a multi-layered print off with, even though you've been using opaque paints, does make a difference. I think that is very interesting to know. I knew it would make a difference with the transparent, but I didn't know how much of a difference it would kind of make with the opaque paints. I mean, I guess because we had the open area in the background, it's kind of giving you a dark background colour, but the fact that it does still alter the yellow on this one, but it makes the blue pop out more, so it's quite interesting to play around with this. So really hope you found this useful. If you haven't already watched the previous video to this and the introduction, then go and check those out. They're talking about just the basics of jelly printing, different plates and ways to apply your paint, and then the experiment video was talking about different types of paint. So here we've been looking at sort of heavy bodied or medium bodied paints, but in that video I look at fluid acrylics, heavy body paints and matte chalk paints as well, which we will be coming back to all sorts of different paints throughout all of the experiment videos as well. And stay tuned for the next Gelli Experiments kind of video, which will be looking at different types of paper. You can see that I love using graph paper, but there's different types of graph paper around. There's handwriting paper, there's tissue paper, there's wet strength paper, there's glassine paper, there's just like recycled brown paper packaging, all sorts of different papers that we're going to be exploring in the next video. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next one. Bye!